Composers have always been searching for new sounds and colors. Around the time of late Beethoven, so about 1830s, and then Brahms after that, composers started searching for new ways to use harmony that weren't within the regular tonal system and weren't as easily analyzable. And one of the colors that they came up with is something that we call thirds-related harmony or chromatic thirds-related harmony. And I'll explain why the chromatic, I like to call it chromatic thirds because it really says what's happening. So if I'm in C major, our favorite key, and I go up a third to E minor, stay in, there's no chromaticism. It's all still white keys. I can go up another third from E to G, and it's still all white keys. But if I go up a third and then add a chromatic, so let's say from C to E major, a new sound and color, and in tonal harmony we'd expect that probably, let's say, how are you going to analyze an E major chord in C? Probably you would analyze it as a secondary dominant, expect it to go to A minor. But what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't function that way? What if it just is a color by itself? Theorists were trying to think, well, what do we call it? So they started calling it just thirds-related harmony because it didn't fulfill the expectations of the regular tonal harmony. So might be a progression that just went just between the two of them. Or if you continued that cycle and went up another major third to A flat, you might have a sound like doesn't fit within the regular harmonic scheme, especially if it doesn't go where we think it's going to go or where it was expected to go in more functional harmony. The E doesn't go to an A, it doesn't resolve really deceptively, it just exists as a sound color. And the A flat, which we might think of as a borrowed chord from the parallel minor, it doesn't really function that way. It's not substituting for anything, it's just a color. So composers started to enjoy doing this. They might even end a piece on a cadence that was, imagine big brass going on. Has a different sound. It's a new sound, and so composers toyed around with that, and the theorists said, well, what's going on here? Because that's what theorists do. They try and explain what composers do and what sounds are going on. It was called thirds-related harmony or chromatic thirds harmony. It became popular around the mid-1800s and has continued on ever since. If you follow through the same thinking, okay, if you can do that with major thirds, what about minor thirds? And clearly, if I'm in the key of C and I go up a minor third, say a major chord there to E flat major, one might say, okay, that's a borrowed chord. But if I continue that and go, and then up another minor third to F sharp major, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're way gone. We're at F sharp major in the key of C. Really, it's as far distant as you can get, but we can kind of hear that there's something going on there. There's some relationship going on. You hear, our ears hear somehow that those are connected. And so that's another way of doing major chromatic thirds. And of course, we can fit in 3 minor thirds in a major key or in any key, which are, again, the roots of a diminished chord. So we could continue that pattern from C to E flat to F sharp major to A. And that, again, was, I think, some of the 20th century Fox newsreels and others. You might hear them close that as a cadence, as like the other one I did before with the major thirds. You hear the. So that's with major chords. But what if I do it with minor chords? We get an even different sound. In fact, perhaps Danny Elfman and some others, it's almost a cliche now. Well, it is a cliche to use this chromatic thirds minor harmony, especially in horror films, because it's a very unsettling sound, and I'll demonstrate what I mean. So instead of those roots now, the A, E flat, F sharp, and or the C, E flat, F sharp, and A being major chords, if they're minor, you start hearing this sound I'm sure you're familiar with. You can almost imagine that's perfect stuff for TV episodes, movies, to when it's something creepy. So it's a very useful kind of harmony to use, especially if you're trying to set a mood like that, a very dark, sinister, creepy mood. So experiment around with those. Again, there's a lot of chromatic notes when you go from, even in C minor, if you go to an E flat minor, I have this G flat added onto it, so very chromatic. If I go to the F sharp minor, we have a C sharp in the key of C minor, and the F sharp, and again the C sharp if I have the A, which is the La, if I'm in the key of C minor. So again, distant kind of, but related harmony. So experiment around with the chromatic thirds, both in major thirds, major harmony, minor thirds, both major and minor harmony, and I think you'll come up with some really interesting new sounds that will be very useful in your compositions.